Friday, November the 10th, 2020. Glad you could be with us here tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever, and I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability, using our Catholic faith, our tradition, scripture, and dictionaries, encyclopedias, and anything that can help me have you walk away from this program being satisfied that your question has been answered. We come on this program every week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And sometimes we go over, and sometimes I'm not here. Like last week, I was not here for 2 days. I don't know if you caught the Wednesday program. We did put an interview that I had with someone regarding science and politics. That was up last Wednesday. I think that went for about an hour and 10 minutes or so. So if you were here at that time, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about that interview and you would like to discuss those tonight, please feel free to do so. Believe it or not, we have some questions that I still have not gotten to from 2 weeks ago Wednesday that I should be getting to sooner or later. We had some mail-in questions also that I want to get to, and I want to try a few of those before we start on our regular board here. All right, so let me start with the following here. Okay. All right, so let me see. I have a follow-up question regarding abortion, if you don't mind. These are more philosophical now, though, but I am still interested in what you would say regarding those. Number one, should a woman be punished for abortion? I see many pro-life communities having a difficult time with this question, maybe because others would treat it as too extreme of a position. But to me, it's illogical to treat it any other way. While it's a natural consequence if we understand life as being from conception, that she should be, to some degree, treating this as any other case of death. For example, that a woman is not under pressure or impression you have. It is a human life, so the judge might be more lenient, punished in some way. Well, let me just say, there's another question after this one. In any civil society, there has to be, in order to be punished for a crime, there has to be full knowledge of the person doing the crime, that this is a crime. This is not acceptable in society. For example, murder. Everybody knows murder is not acceptable, but even in some cases, murder can be acceptable in self-defense, going to war, things like that. So there are exceptions to almost every law, okay, because life is complicated and it doesn't always fit into a cookie cutter situation. So, but things have changed in our society, haven't they? Yeah. Murder is still a crime, capital crime, but, you know, adultery used to be a capital crime. That's no longer a capital crime. That's like not even a sin as far as some societies are concerned. You know, homosexuality is another one. Used to be crime. They would lock you away if you were, you know, caught doing that. Contraception used to be against the laws of society. And in the United States, at least, that changed in 1963 when we had a Supreme Court case to overturn the prevailing view. So there are a lot of things. In other words, my point is there's a lot of things that, you know, used to be capital crimes that are no longer capital crimes. which tells you what? It tells you that the society is deteriorating. Because if you can't call them crimes any longer, and those sexual issues are the basic nuts and bolts of human society, and you're not able to categorize them correctly when they're abused, well, your society's on the downhill slide. Okay. And that's where we are right now. We're on the downhill slide. The point, however, is that in order for you to be punished for a crime, it has to be a crime that the civil society has said this is a crime, and we will punish you for it. Okay. If the society decides that it's no longer a crime, well, then you can't be punished for it, civilly speaking. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that the sin is no longer a moral issue, or that somehow, because the society has decided that it's not punishable because it's no longer a crime, that it's not a sin any longer. Okay. And this is always, as St. Augustine told us, there's a city of God and there's a city of man. Okay. In the city of God, all those things I mentioned are still sins, and you will suffer eternal damnation for them. Okay. And as long as the church keeps preaching that, then they're fully culpable. Well, and today, of course, the church has begun to slide on those things. So homosexuality, well, not such a big sin anymore, you know. Contraception, yeah, maybe in some cases, but not in every case. Adultery, well, yeah, we can, it's a sin, but yeah, we're a little more lenient now and on those things. And so even the church has slid. But God's laws, of course, never change. They're always the same. So there's always going to be some degree of moral culpability in God's eyes. If you divorce someone, you know, your society may allow you to do that. But you divorce someone outside of fornication, you're culpable. You're guilty of mortal sin. Okay. No matter what the society says. All right. Now, the society is not going to punish you. God certainly will, however, when you stand before his judgment seat. Okay. So, and if you didn't know it, the God, he'll judge you according to what you know, but you're still morally culpable for all those sins. And it's your business, actually, as a creature of God, to find out what God allows and what he doesn't, regardless of what your society says. Okay. And if you don't do that, then you're shirking your responsibility. And God's going to hold you accountable for that. Okay. So in a perfect world, yes, the woman, of course, you wouldn't have abortion if you had a perfect world, but let's say you had a near perfect world and somebody just happened to commit abortion, you bet your booties she would be punished for it. She would give her life because of that. She took a life, therefore she has to give a life. In a perfect world, that's the way it should work. Okay. And when God gave laws to Israel, this is the only time in history where we had a theocracy wherein not only were the laws given by God, but God sometimes intervened and gave judgments on who committed a crime and who didn't and how they should be punished. And most of these were written in the Mosaic Law, but sometimes God had to intervene in cases that were difficult. And this is why the priest had the Urim and the Thummim. Urim and the Thummim. He would call upon God to give a yes or no answer to a question posed to him about a certain case, a certain crime that was done. And so they had God's adjudication on that issue. But that's as close to a perfect society as we've ever gotten. Right now we have separation of God from state. So you can just imagine how difficult that's going to be to try to get to the perfect ideal state. Okay. In the closer you get to the perfect state, the perfect theocracy, let's say, okay, even though we purport to have a society that's established in God, and our Constitution says that we have certain inalienable rights because we're all creatures of God, that's just about as far as it goes. Okay, I mean, it's nice that that's in there, but it doesn't go far enough. So you're going to have leaks in this system, and you're going to have instances where capital crimes are no longer capital crimes as far as the society goes. Now, when America was first established, and I'm talking about America, and I know we have a lot of people listening out there in from different countries, but in America, it was almost, it went without saying that God was the basis for every law that was established in the states. Now it's to the point, some 275 or so plus years later, that they try to keep God out of it as much as possible. Okay. And as that goes, the more that they keep God out of society, the more lax the laws are going to be, and the less adjudicated they're going to be, and the less punishment there's going to be. So they're going to proliferate, and which is what we're seeing today. Okay. And the society will last as long as they can, let's say, tolerate this awful situation they've got themselves into, until it gets so bad that it just overwhelms the society. And if you're not a fan of Arnold Toynbee, he wrote 19 volumes on all the civilizations in society, and they all end up the same way. They deteriorated because they could never get the civil society of their day to keep the laws around sex intact. And that's where every society, there was also murder, there was greed, there was all kinds of things that happened. But the end game, so to speak, the thing that made was the tipping point, was the sexual mores of the society began to fall apart, and they went downhill real fast after that. Okay, so that's what you see. All right, so let me go on this next question here. All right, well, I think I already answered that. So let me go on to the next question. Okay. Dr. Sungenis, my question is in regard to vows, VOWS, whether or not it is sinful to modify or change them. I promised Our Lady in August that I wouldn't drink again until Christmas. This was due to the air conditioner failing. I promised that if it were something I could afford to have repaired, I would abstain from drinking. And it was indeed easily repairable. I kept my promise, but it is becoming exceedingly difficult to continue. I never married, and I can't visit my family like I used to do because of the virus madness. I guess you're talking about COVID-19. Drinking is one of the few things I look forward to. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I don't deprive myself of the use of reason, and only drink 7 ounces of spirits in mineral water, and then only for 3 days a week. That is until I gave it up. I have 54 days to go, and it's getting to the point that it's very hard to bear. I was wondering if I could give up meat instead, say for Sunday and holy days for 180 days. Would I thereby commit a sin? I apologize for rambling, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, Zachary, the Bible does tell us, the church does tell us also, that when you make a vow, you should keep it. But usually, not usually, most of the time, they're talking about legal vows that you make, okay, wherein not personal vows. I mean, that they also are included, but I have to make a distinction here between a personal vow that you make and a legal vow that you make. Okay. So, in other words, if you sign a mortgage lease or a mortgage, not a lease, a mortgage documents to buy a house, you're vowing basically to pay the mortgage payment every month as you keep your house and blah, blah, blah. When you go before a judge, and you've been accused of, speeding on the highway or whatever, and you take a vow to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. There's another instance of a legal situation. When you marry a woman, you take her as your wife and you vow that you will be faithful, rich or poor, blah, 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 all the vows that we take normally. That's a legal vow. Okay, so you are legally bound to keep that vow, whatever that vow is, whether it's a marriage, the court, or mortgage, whatever it is. And if you don't, of course, there's going to be repercussions, and they will be legal repercussions, wherein you can be put in jail, you can be fined, you can be assessed your property, on and on it goes. It's all kinds of ways to get to you. Then there are personal vows that we make, okay? And personal vows are what they are, personal. That's between you and God, wherein you want to please God by promising him A, B, C, or D, whatever it is, okay? And so just because it's not legal does not mean you're not obligated to keep it. Let's say it's not with God. Let's say you make a personal vow to a friend of yours and you say, John, I need your help. And if you do this for me, then I will do this for you, something else for you. That's a vow, okay? Because you're promising an exchange of benefits. If he benefits you, you will benefit him. Now, if you renege on that, okay, the policeman's not going to come up to you and say, "Oh, caught you. You reneged on your personal vow," and then send you to jail because it's not legal. It's a personal vow that you've made. But what will happen is, of course, you will lose his friendship. And I doubt if he will ever befriend you again because of what you did. That's the price you're going to pay for breaking your vow, your personal vow. The relationship's over. And it's going to take a lot to get it back if you ever get it back, okay? And so that's the price you pay. Now, the same thing would be true with you and God. You make a personal vow to God and you say, well, God, I promise to do this for such and such a time. And you put your whole heart into it. Well, that's a personal vow that you've made to God. Okay. And he's going to expect that you keep that vow. Unless, of course, something comes up that impinges upon your ability to keep the vow. Then it has to be something that is serious and that is totally debilitating to you and out of your control. And then you go to your friend. Let's have the issue back again with the friend. And you go to John and you say, John, I know I promised this, but this happened. I lost my job. I got into an accident. I got to go to the hospital, all kinds of things. And John, if he's going to be a good friend to you, is going to say, what? Okay, Joe, I forgive you of the promise that you made me, at least temporarily, until things get better in your life. That's what friends do. Okay. So in other words, you can go to your friend and you can appeal for mercy. Sometimes you can do that with the law. You can appeal for mercy and the law, the judge may supersede the law and give you mercy because he sees that you're really trying and you're not going to take advantage of the law or the system, and he could give you a reprieve. Not all the time. But a friend is much more inclined to give you a reprieve because of your situation. Okay? So even though you made the vow, there is a way to alleviate the pressure of the vow if you have good reasons for it. And it all depends on your friend and his disposition, whether he's going to say yes or no. Okay? Now, if he senses, of course, that you're just giving him a load of bull, he's going to say, no, you made the promise to me, you keep it, or our friendship is over. He could say that. Okay? And he has every right to if he senses that you're just trying to pull his leg. Okay? But if he senses you're sincere and you really do have these problems, any friend is going to give you time to relax the vow and you go on your way. And then when things get better for you, then and of course, what do you learn from this? Don't make vows unless you can keep them. Because if not, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be pleading for mercy. Now, that's, of course, pleading for mercy is a lot different than if you would have said, oh, I know I made this vow, but I can't keep it. Tough luck, John. I'm just not going to do it, even though I promised you. Well, you just thrown the friendship away, and you're not going to get it back. That's it. It's it. You make that decision, it's over. Okay. So you could go that way, or you could go the mercy way and plead with him for mercy. And as long as you're sincere, he probably would give it to you. Now, God's going to work the same way with you. Okay. Yeah. You made a vow, and you weren't going to drink until Christmas, and you go to your Father in sincere prayer, and you say, God, I know I made this vow, but because of this, and this, I'm having a hard time keeping it. Okay. Now you better make the reasons good, because you're not going to fool God. Okay. He's going to be a little bit more perceptive than your friend is. Of course, we don't know because you can't see God or hear him, but if you're a Christian, what God expects of you. So you would seek him and ask him for mercy. And if you've pleaded well enough, if you prayed long enough, and you feel satisfied that, I think God's going to give me mercy, and therefore I'm going to postpone this promise that I made to him. Okay, well and good. Okay. But again, you're the one who can judge by your own conscience whether you're being sincere or not with God. You're not going to pull the wool over his eyes. Okay. So that's the option you have. The other thing is, as I said, when you're in this kind of situation, what's the first thing you're going to learn? Don't make vows unless you can keep them. And then you won't be in this kind of situation where you have to go pleading for mercy. Okay. So never be hasty to make a vow. Words are easy to say. Doing is very hard. Okay. We all have to learn that the hard way sometimes. All right. Let's see what else we have here. I haven't looked at these for 2 weeks, so I don't even know what's here. All right. Here's Dear Bob, you said you would provide proofs for justifying your public statement that Pope Paul VI was homosexual, after a week earlier stating that there's documentary evidence for this. You then referenced Randy Engel's rate of sodomy. You read much from it, and it sounded interesting. Perhaps it could be true. However, would it not be prudent, not to mention charitable, to leave it at that? That is, perhaps credible, or theoretically possible rather than stating that there's documentary proof to substantiate a claim? Or was there some part of what you referenced that gave irrefutable proof that didn't leave any shadow of a doubt? Just that I don't recall that there was, even if there was elsewhere in Engels or someone else's work on this topic. My concern, and these are just my thoughts from one Catholic to another, is that we should be careful with accusations such as these, even when there's several allegations, and err on the side of caution, at least in a public forum such as your program. I'm a great admirer of yours, and these are just some thoughts. I could be wrong, and you're welcome to let me know if I am, or at least provide whatever feedback you see fit. Philip. Okay, Philip, thank you for that question. Thank you for your comments on that. And I mean that sincerely, because this is an area of Christian relations that cannot be overlooked or minimized in any way, okay? So let me give you some thoughts. I'm not saying I'm right, but I want to give you some thoughts, and because I want to alleviate any concerns you have. That would be my goal. One is, Randy Engel in her book, Rite of Sodomy, and if you haven't read that yet, please pick up all 5 volumes, and the 5th volume is the one that talks about Paul VI. First of all, when you're in a court of law and you use some sort of legal language here that is making me lean toward, what did you say? Documentary proof to substantiate such a claim, shadow of a doubt. There is no shadow, that it didn't leave a shadow of a doubt. Irrefutable proof. Okay, well, even in a court of law, sometimes you don't have irrefutable proof. And it's not beyond the shadow of a doubt. It's called reasonable doubt. Beyond reasonable doubt. Okay, so even when you're convicting someone of murder, okay, beyond a reasonable doubt. So whatever phrase you want to use, shadow of doubt, reasonable doubt, there's a little give and take there. But I am willing to say, okay, there's no irrefutable proof, in the sense that, like the woman who was caught in adultery in John chapter 8, and the Pharisees brought her to Jesus, and they said, Jesus, what did they say to him? This woman was caught in the very act. In other words, they were spying on her and had a bunch of people, other Pharisees around them, and they saw her committing an act of adultery, okay? Fornicating with some man in her bedroom or his bedroom, and that's eyewitness evidence, okay? So in that sense, it's irrefutable. And in the Old Testament law, you had to have 2 or 3 witnesses in order to convict someone of adultery. And if you didn't have them, they would not be punished by death. They might have some other punishment, but not death, because that was a capital crime, and it was punishable by death. Adultery was. So in that sense, they had irrefutable proof. But we're not asking for the death penalty. Okay. What we're saying is there is credible evidence that's been out there for many, many years, ever since the 1950s, about Paul VI. And this only touches one area of his life. There were other areas politically, morally, not sexually, that are also in suspicion. Okay. And this is where the other parts of Randy Engel's book, and also Marion Horvat and Attila Gamaris, will fill you in if you go read those, because they're the other two references I had mentioned. We have some real sordid characters in the Catholic papacy in the 20th century, and Paul VI being one of them. Okay, and Randy, who has done probably the most work on this, can identify the very partners of Paul VI, as I've read in one of the portions of her book. So we know that evidence exists. We know their names. We know when they frequented the Vatican to go see Pope Paul VI. We know when Pope Paul VI went out on his own. These are all facts that are not in dispute. Now, whether you can take all these facts and say, we have irrefutable evidence, okay, no, none of us would go that far, okay? But we have a lot of substantial, some of it circumstantial, that he was one and practiced it. Now, when he was posed with this, of course, he denied it. Well, who wouldn't? Okay, because to say, yeah, I'm a homosexual and I'm the Pope of the Catholic Church, that's not going to happen in the real world. Okay. And so, in other words, he just denied the charges. And that's all that was left. So, there's not enough there for me to exonerate the man. I'll put it to you that way. To say, oh yeah, here's the evidence we have. This totally exonerates him. Let's put this whole thing to bed and, go on with our day. We haven't found any of that evidence. Okay. All we have in his defense is his denial. And with the evidence we have, that's just not good enough. Unless you are, when you consider all the shenanigans that were going on in the papacy, with John the 23rd, much less Paul the 6th, John Paul the 1st, John Paul II, Benedict, Francis, and now they're sainting each other. It just, enough is enough. So when those allegations come out that Paul VI was into this perverse lifestyle, the evidence all around is, this is the atmosphere that we have to judge this. But and how did all the homosexuals get into the seminaries? Where did that all start? So there's more circumstantial evidence. It started in the late 60s, early 70s, and went on after that. And he was reigning as Pope. And it is documented fact that he made room for them in the seminaries. Now, why would he do that if he wasn't partial to homosexuality? And that's just being kind about it. So, it just, when you add it all up, you would be naive not to have suspicion, at least a suspicion about him once you've read all the documents and judged it by the atmosphere that was already prevalent in the church at that time. I would be amiss in not telling you that, of walking you through it and thinking logically and saying, well, what does this end up being? and it's as clear as day, and you say, well, I don't want to accuse the Pope of anything, there's a little room for that. But when the evidence is so overwhelming and you're getting it from many sources and circumstantial evidence on top of that, and what was going on in the seminaries and the whole sexual explosion that happened in the late 20th century, you begin to add it all up. And if it's not going down that path, boy, there's going to have to be something that's going to have to say to you, hold it up. Here's this other evidence. And we just haven't seen that evidence yet to stop us from coming to this conclusion. Okay. So, I'll have to leave it at that. It's a sticky area, I agree, and you want to be gracious on the one hand, but you don't want to be stupid on the other hand. Okay? There's, especially with all the stuff that we've seen going on in the last, 70 years. It's just too much to ask someone, just withhold your opinion, because it's the Pope. Well, the popes are causing the problems that we have in the church. That's been evident for a long time. And who knows what's going to happen after Francis? It's bad enough with him. So anyway, all right, let me see what else we have here. Okay. Hi, Robert. You've made mention a few times about different levels of church teaching, and not everything is authoritative or binding, but that we have to give assent. Assent, by a secular definition, is to give an expression of approval or agreement. Is there a different Catholic definition for this? No. We've used the common words that are used in everyday English or the vernacular. Just that it's hard to agree with or approve certain things our current Pope and some of our current magisterium says or teaches. On the flip side, we also need to be careful that we don't become like Protestants, where we pick and choose what to believe. Further, you question the legitimacy of recent canonizations. Wouldn't this be a case of not assenting? Would appreciate your thoughts, James. Okay, so again, sticky situation. Okay. Assent is, if I give assent to Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti encyclical, what I'm saying is that because he is the Pope, I give my assent to his authority, and I do not automatically reject anything that he says or writes. Okay? That's part of the assent. Now, if I were to say, if somebody would say, here's a document from the church, and I would say, who wrote it? And he would say, Pope Francis. And if I said, throw it in the trash can, then I'm not giving my assent. Okay? Because it's the Pope, I will read it. And by agreeing to read it because he's the Pope, I'm giving partial assent, because I'm reading it just because he's the Pope. Okay? Because I recognize his authority in the church. Now, I'm ready to accept what he wrote in that encyclical. But if I come across something that smells a little funny, and I know from my own experience and knowledge that what he's saying there, if that's what he meant to say, doesn't stack up very well, then I, by my conscience, that is a formed conscience, okay? I'm not some Joe off the street who's never heard of the Catholic Church before. By my conscience, if I see something in there that starts waving red flags, then I have a right not only to be suspicious of it, but not to accept it, because it's a matter of conscience then. And the church allows me that privilege. Okay? The church cannot make me sin. And if I go against my conscience, then I'm sinning. And as long as I have a formed conscience, then I have every right to take that position. So what I'm saying is basically two things. In the general sense, we assent to what the Pope has written. In the assent, we give ourselves the room to judge, because we have a mind and a conscience. And if it's a controversial thing, then, if the Pope said, Mary was the mother of God and Jesus came from, and I disagree with that, well, I'm the one who has the problem. Okay. But if the Pope starts talking about Pachamama and that we ought to save the world from, plastic trash gathered in the oceans, well, yeah, I don't want plastic in the oceans either. Okay. But I'm not going to go give praise to Pachamama. All right. So we're going to make distinctions in what the Pope wrote. It doesn't mean that we have not given assent. I give my assent by reading it because it's from the Pope. Okay. And that's as far as I can go in some of those instances of what he wrote in Fratelli Tutti. Okay. This is part of being Catholic. You're not a slave in the sense that everything the Pope writes down, you must accept it. Okay, that's not what assent means. Assent means, first of all, you recognize the authority structure of the Catholic Church. Priest, bishop, cardinal, pope. And you're on the low end of the totem pole. Okay, and you're reading an authoritative document. Great. Let's see what this thing says, because I'm only going to read authoritative documents. But even they have problems sometimes. Okay. Now, I may be wrong when I read that. I may read a sentence there that I think, in my view, is wrong, and somebody else may say, well, what's so wrong with that? Or somebody else may accept it totally. You're going to get those opinions from everybody. But I, as far as my conscience is concerned, I can't accept their views. I think they're being too lenient. Or they're not seeing the whole picture, or they're missing some parts to complete their judgment. Okay. And so we'll have a discussion. All right. But I have the right, if it impinges on my conscience, not to accept it, unless it's Catholic dogma. Mary was the mother of God. Mary was the mother of God and produced Jesus, the Savior of the world. Yeah. If I disagree with dogma, then I'm the one who has the problem. Okay. But we all know encyclicals aren't dogma. Okay. They're usually pastoral teachings that come out in encyclicals. Sometimes they come very close to giving us doctrine. Other times not so. Okay. And we all use our mind and our will and our formed conscience to make decisions on them. Okay. So that's how you can have assent on the one hand, and yet we have critical thinking on the other hand. Okay. All right. One more. Do you have an interpretation of Pope Leo XIII's vision of Jesus and the devil and the 100 years Jesus gives him? Is this merely the timeline of the many Fatima consecrations and the fall of communism in Russia in the early 1990s, or does it go beyond that? From Mike. I would say, yeah, it's over. The 100 years, whenever it started with Leo the 13th, that's over. Okay. And I've already told you my views on Fatima. They have changed. And I'll be writing something on that very soon. Okay, so let me go up to the board here. See what we have tonight. Okay, Ryan says, number one, hi, Dr. Sungenis. Have you read Bechamp or Pasteur? Yes, both of them. A lost chapter in the history of biology. It seems to me to do germ theory what you did, heliocentrism. I have to leave that for somebody else, Ryan. The whole cosmology thing was hard enough to understand. When you get into biology, and germ theory and all that stuff, yeah, it's pretty complicated. But I do know the difference between the two, and you know, I wish I had another lifetime to work on it. I'd love to do something on those, something with regard to that, but not in my line of work right now. Arnold says, what are your thoughts on the Democratic election fraud we all just witnessed? Yeah, well, it's a long time in coming there, Arnold. I'm sure most of us have been up to the wee hours of the morning listening to YouTube videos and Newsmax and all kinds of, and wondering where Fox went. Yeah, see, they just never got over the fact that Trump won in 2016. So it's been 3.5 years, almost 4 now, of trying to figure out what's the best way to get Trump out of office. Because the world is now a global entity, and Trump still insists on a national government as big as the America is and as productive as it has been, and we've been number one for a long time. Why would we give that up? So we have the reserve currency of the world, and we control most of the world with that reserve currency. And most of the wars have been fought over the last 100 years have been to preserve the American dollar as the world's reserve currency. So the globalists now who realize that want to get America out of the way, basically. And they want to take over, and they have global ambitions, and he was the worst thing that could have happened to them. So it's no surprise that they're going, if they failed in every other way to get him out, even to the point of impeaching the man, that they're going to try something else. Okay. And we saw it. We saw it November the 4th, last Tuesday. So it's really no surprise, if you've been following the ball, that this would be coming down the pike, and it has in a big way. And of course, now they're all saying, well, now Republicans, you have to just let bygones be bygones, and now we all have to unite, and let's move forward together, and blah blah blah, all that stuff. And they're not sincere. It's just a ploy so that they don't have any trouble with their agenda. But they're going to get their agenda through one way or the other. And the first way to do it is get Trump out of the way. And everything else from then on is downhill. It's going to be quite easy for them. Unless the sleeping lion, that is the Republican voters, 70 million plus of them, can take the bull by the horns and figure this is not a time to be sitting in my living room, watching Fox News. I ought to be out there making the news. And they just may be pushed to that point where they get up off the sofa and go out and start doing what they have to do. It doesn't look, I hate to be pessimistic, but the choices we have are not good. It's just a matter of choosing the least confrontational or the least damaging choice, but we're going to have to fight. And whether it's politically, and I hope it stays on the political level, because if it doesn't, it's going to go into the mano a mano level. And boy, who knows what's going to happen if that occurs. But I believe they had plans to get Trump out, even if Trump won. I've heard some voices out there saying that they were just going to go get the army to drag him out, even if he won. That's how far some of these people are thinking. Okay, and that's dangerous, really dangerous. But the next best way to do it, of course, was to rig the election. And you don't have to be an Einstein to watch the TV and see where one candidate has 100,000 and the Republican candidate has 95,000, and you turn your head from the TV and then you come back and the Democrat has 105,000 and the Republican has 90,000. How do you take votes away from someone when you've already tabulated them? Well, there's this computer that does it, switches the votes. And apparently that computer program is being used all over. So that's something that needs to be investigated. Now, as long as we can investigate these allegations, and I've heard stories on both sides of the fence. There's some very intelligent Democrats out there who know how the polls work, and they can tell you that this is what really happened, although it's being accused of having this happened. But this is what really happened. And you listen to them and they sound like they know what they're talking about. And so you can see that not every accusation that's being made out there can hold water. But there are some of them that do hold water. Not only do they hold water, they make us suspicious of the whole process. Like when you put pizza boxes on the windows so that the Republicans can't come in and see what you're doing. And meanwhile, you see these cars pull up with boxes and boxes of stuff, and you're wondering, gee, could they be votes that they're going to add and not allow us to see these votes be added in Philadelphia? Okay, so there's instances where, yeah, there is definitely some shenanigans going on, okay, or dead people voting. I mean, if you find one dead person and they all vote for Biden somehow, but if you find one, that means there's, like, you find an ant on your kitchen floor, well, that means there's a whole nest of them somewhere out there because he came from somewhere. Okay, so we know that possibility exists. And then all kinds of, they keep tabulating the votes. Now in Arizona, Trump is like 0.5% behind. The more votes they count. And now you have to exclude all the votes that were taken in after 8 p.m., especially since, Justice Alito said so. And of course, when Philadelphia got that, this is a city. I was born in Philadelphia. Okay. I know about Philadelphia politics. It's been Democratic for over 60 years. It's a machine. It's a Democratic machine. and they can just about do anything they want. That's why it's one of the filthiest cities in the United States, Philadelphia, if you've ever gone through there. Oh my gosh. Anyway, it's like Washington, D.C. until they started cleaning it up about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. One of the filthiest cities. It's a shame to be the capital of the United States, as a matter of fact. It was so bad. But most Democratic, right down the line. What was it on the vote count? It was 98% of Washington, D.C. residents voted for Biden, 2% for Trump. Okay, so, you add 2 and 2 together and you get 4. And but Philadelphia's been democratically run for over 60 years. And they had no qualms about putting the pizza boxes up on the window so the Republicans couldn't see in. And we had some woman from the Philadelphia polling commission is on tape saying, keep them out of here and all that kind of stuff. So, we know that something's going on. It's just a matter of getting it to the court, getting the court to accept, and starting the legal process rolling. Okay. We waited 37 days when we had the Bush and Gore fiasco in the 2000 election. And so why all the Democrats are out there screaming? Well, we know why they're screaming. Okay. Because a lot of them have their hands dirty, not only on this issue, but a lot of issues, because they have the hearings going on now regarding the FBI investigation of Trump that went on, the Mueller report and all that stuff. Everything's coming to a head now, and rightly so. And I'm glad to see it, but we have to let the process work. Okay, that's the one thing we have to do. We can't. We need to calm down, let the legal process work, and see what it turns out to be. And if it turns out to be that so many votes are overturned, as they have been in Arizona, and now North Carolina has just basically we have a new senator or the senator that kept his seat in North Carolina, and we have Trump projected to win North Carolina now. So things are changing day by day. We see them being overturned day by day. We have to let the process work itself out, because only on that basis can we act and move things along. This is why we have the legal process. Nobody ought to be thinking about, any kind of violence or anything of that sort, because we'll just destroy the whole thing. We'll let the legal process work itself out. And that's what I'm waiting for. And you got to be patient for that. Okay. So, but, this is nothing that is a surprise, really. It's actually just makes me think, what's going to be the next move? What's going to be the next move? If they will go this far, what's going to be the next move? And we have to anticipate that. And we have to be ready for it. Okay. So that's what I think. Okay. We just have to be patient and wait to see what the numbers turn out to be. And if they turn out in Trump's favor, well, all hell's going to break loose. You watch. All right. Obviously, the McCarrick report, but have you seen Archbishop Vigano's response? On the McCarrick report, no, I have not seen that yet. I've been very busy trying to get some books completed and have not been up on that issue. If someone has a link that they could give me for Vigano's response, because it was supposed to come out today, right? Tuesday? Yeah. So, yeah, my guess is that the Vatican whitewashed it to enough of a degree that got Vigano got his dander up. That's what I'm guessing. But I have not read it yet, so I need to do that. Lawrence, perhaps you can send me the link to that so I can read it in time for tomorrow's program, 8 to 10. But thank you for bringing that up, Manny. I'm sorry, Ryan. Thank you for bringing that up. We'll deal with that tomorrow, if you don't mind. This guy named Pack Islander for Life says, who is the president of the USA? Well, that would be Donald Trump. Today, I just bought a trumpy bear. Was advertised on Newsmax. A trumpy bear. It's got a bear, like a stuffed bear with long blonde hair combed over to the side and real bushy yellow, not yellow, but golden eyebrows like Trump has. So what was that? That was $39.95, but it was well worth it. Yeah, so it's and when I went on the website, it says limited supply, so I made sure I got mine. Trumpy bear. But he's the president. There is no such thing as a president-elect. That's just a term that people have used. He doesn't, if the numbers tally in his favor, then Biden does not become president until January the 20th. And he just got shot down today by the GSA because he wanted the GSA to turn over the money that they have been keeping. And the GSA said, no, you're not the president yet. So he got his first knockdown. He's going to get a few more if he keeps up what he's trying to do here. And of course, he was complaining why Trump isn't conceding. This is all part of the show, okay? It's just to make it appear as if it happened, it's over, you got to accept it, to take all the steam out of us, you see. Because the more you hear from the news media, from the politicians, even the Republicans, some of them, no good, like Chris Christie and who's the other guy up in Massachusetts? I forget his name. It's always the same stuff from these people, At any rate, he's the president, and he's doing as much as he can to keep everything that he has done intact, and he needs our help. So if you have time, maybe you can go to the MAGA Million March down there in Washington, D.C. This weekend. I know Tim Gordon has been on his show, and his wife was on there, and boy, there's two stalwarts of the Catholic faith. And they are good leaders for the rest of the people. So if you haven't seen his little talk for an hour with him and his wife, I think it's well worth listening to. He'll tell you how serious it is. And he actually read a letter that was, what was the guy named Anton? David Anton, who wrote his prediction in September of what was going to happen during the election. He was spot on almost every category. So it's well worth listening to because of that letter, because it's like, wow. Was this guy spot on? At any rate, all right, let's go on here. Was the book of Enoch part of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Good question. I don't know the answers to that, William. I don't know. I know it existed before the Dead Sea Scrolls, but whether the Dead Sea Scrolls had the book of Enoch, I couldn't tell you. That I'd have to look up. According to Pope Paul VI, Vatican II avoided proclaiming in an extraordinary manner any dogma carrying the mark of infallibility. Does this mean the Vatican II is fallible and may contain error? Okay, so let me dwell on this for a second, because the habit that a lot of Catholics have is, if it doesn't have the label of infallible, then they automatically assume the opposite may be true, that it's fallible. That's not the way to think of it, okay? Of course, someone can say, well, if it's not infallible, then there has to be room for it to be fallible in some sense, even though it may not be fallible. Okay, yeah, we can say that. Okay, but just because it's not infallible doesn't automatically mean that there's stuff in there that's fallible, that has been determined to be fallible. Okay. I hope you can see the difference between those two. But the knee-jerk reaction among some is that if it's not fallible, that if it's not infallible, then that means there's something there that's fallible. No, that's not. No, that is not. You could have every statement in Vatican II be perfectly true and still not be infallible. Why? Because infallible is a legal definition. Okay, it's not talking about it is talking about the veracity of the statement, but when we put the label infallible on it, it's a legal stipulation that we're making about the document. And that's different than saying that something is true. Okay, something could be true, but not necessarily have received the document or the label infallible. Most of the stuff we know as Catholics is true, but most of it has not been labeled infallible. Okay, so we have to remember that. So when you go into Vatican II and you say to yourself, oh, I'm looking at a fallible document here. No, not unless you find something that's fallible. That's a mistake. That's not true. Okay. Now that's where the challenge comes in. Because we have a lot of people who look at Vatican II and they say, oh, it's filled with error. Filled with error. Okay, let's go look at a couple. Point out a couple to me. And I've challenged people on this. Show me that that's an error. Blatant, no questions asked, uncompromised error. They're not able to do it. Okay? They're not able to do it. Why? Because words are funny things. Words are funny things. You can, it's just uncanny that, and it all depends on the disposition of the reader of the document. If he's convinced that Vatican II has errors, he's going to see errors all over the place. Okay? That's just the nature of the beast. That's just the way our minds work. Someone today was saying, this is like when we all watched the O.J. Simpson trial back in, 1996? Yeah, I think it was 1996. And we all saw the same testimony for weeks and weeks and weeks upon end. And you have one group that saw it this way, that he was exonerated, and the other group said, you've got to be absolutely insane that he can be exonerated. Okay? They all saw the same evidence. Well, what caused the difference? It all depends on the disposition they came into the court with, or whoever was watching on TV. And they're going to interpret it in light of their disposition, their mental disposition. whatever that is. Okay? So, because so many problems in the church came after Vatican II, everybody points the finger, and even Vigano does this. Well, the problem must be Vatican II. No. Guns aren't the problem. It's the people that shoot the guns. They're the problem. Okay? There's a big difference in condemning Vatican II documents and condemning the people that misinterpreted Vatican II documents to their agenda, just like we have today in the U.S. political system. You have Democrats and Republicans looking at the same Constitution and each calling the other, you're not going by the Constitution. Why? Because they have different frameworks from where they're coming from. They interpret the words the way they want to interpret the words, because words are funny things. Okay? They can be made to say a lot of different things. So that's where you have to be real careful. Okay? So even if it's true that Vatican II was not put in a dogmatic format, which it is true. It's not. It's written in prose. It's a big, thick, like a novel is. And you're reading prose, just like you're reading a manuscript. It's not written in canons. Okay. But that doesn't mean that what it's saying isn't true. Okay. And then what we do is only concentrate on the 5 documents that give some trouble in certain key areas, and then we forget all the other documents that were written, all the other 12 documents, and they're beautiful documents. I don't know if you've ever read them. They're beautiful. Okay? So, yeah, I don't see anybody talking about those documents. Found error in them. So, yeah, this is a very delicate situation. You have to treat it correctly. You can't go too far to the right or the left on this. You have to be fair to the fact that it's the 23rd Ecumenical Council of the Catholic Church. Okay, signed off by the reigning Pope. The beauty of the Catholic Church is the fact that Paul VI, who signed off on it as the pontiff, who was responsible as the shepherd for the universal church, guaranteeing the truth of these documents for us in his signature, was the same Pope that we suspect was a homosexual. Now, some people may call that a total contradiction. I call that the beauty of the Catholic Church. Because why? What does it tell us? The man could be as corrupt as Judas. And yet, because he's the Pope, Christ promised that he would give us the truth. Because whatever he binds, heaven is going to bind. And that's how the Catholic Church is safeguarded. Okay? So that's what makes the Catholic Church tick, because it's run by someone above. Okay? And that will be until the end of time. All right. All right. Ryan says, I've heard people saying that Vigano is just jealous he wasn't promoted, and that's why he's making such a fuss. Well, that's slander. Okay. And I doubt very much that that's his motivation. Okay. Look at his track record, where he's been, what he's done. Come on, man. You don't have to look very far to see the corruption. I've seen it up close and personal with some priests that I know. Okay. I have seen it. This is not something that somebody's making up. Okay. I've written about 5 different papers on this. I've read all the books on this. This is not coming out of thin air. McCarrick is just scratching the surface of all the stuff that's been going on for the last 50 years. Okay? He just happens to be one of the worst ones because he had the most power. To anybody who says Vigano's motivation is that he's jealous, they'll run the other way. Okay. All right. Second question, Arnold says, I thought the resurrection was going to happen at the last judgment. How is it that Joe Biden got all these votes from dead people? Boy, I saw a joke today. Oh, what did it say? My father did something that I never thought he would do, and that's vote for a Democrat, especially since he's dead. something like that. There's total misdirection. It was very funny. Dr. Sungenis, what steps would you have to take in order to get a nihil obstat and imprimatur for your New Testament commentary? Well, like any book I've got an imprimatur for, you have to send it to the bishop that you reside in or that the publisher resides in. So let's say my publisher was from Illinois, that I could send it to the Bishop of Illinois in the diocese that the publishing company was, or I, as the author, can send it to my bishop here in Pennsylvania. And then you ask them that you're seeking a nihil obstat and imprimatur. You give them material. Now, it can't be published. Your book it can't be published yet, which is true of the New Testament commentary. And then you send it to them, and you ask them to review it for meriting a nihil obstat and imprimatur. That's all there is to it. And they'll either accept it, send it back to you. They'll contact you in some way, and they'll say, okay, this is going to take 6 months. It's blah, blah, blah. And, that's all there is to it. So it's not a big deal. You just send it to them with a request and let them take the rest and see what they're going to do with it. Hi, Dr. Sungenis. What are your thoughts on the widespread voter fraud and the Democratic efforts to fabricate it? How is the situation in your neck of the woods? Well, I live near Philadelphia, Clinton, so we've got the hottest part of the country right now regarding this whole issue. And like I was just saying, Philadelphia's been run by Democrats for the last 60 years. It's a virtual machine. The rest of Pennsylvania is all red. It's all Republican, except for Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. But the Philadelphia area, it's always been Democratic. And see, the problem in Pennsylvania was that Philadelphia did not turn out the voters like the Democrats thought they would. And so they were behind. And what do you do when you're behind? Well, you already have in place, mail-in ballots that came in after the deadline, and you have those in reserve just in case you need them. And since they were behind 400,000 votes, by what, 11 p.m., just so happened that they found another 400,000 votes, all for Biden, in the wee hours of the morning on November 5th. Gosh, what a coincidence. Of course, the same thing happened in Michigan and Wisconsin. Was it like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, something like that? We had hundreds of thousands of votes for just Biden in Wisconsin and Michigan, virtually at the same time. Wow, what another coincidence. So, yeah. Well, like I said, we have to wait it out. Let the legal eagles do their work. That's what they're there for. And if there's something to it, by golly, it's going to come out. And then, as I said, all hell's going to break loose. Bernard, nice to see you, Bernard. Do you think Biden's votes violated the Benford law, used by forensic accountants to identify fraud taxes and sometimes used to identify possible election fraud? Yes, it appears that the algorithm went crazy, and yeah, I mean, you can tell these guys have been doing these stats for a long, long time. They can tell. And where there's smoke, there's fire. And these algorithms will tell them exactly what to expect and how fast it's going to come in and all the votes as they get tabulated. And if it's like one of those Richter scale, when an earthquake comes, it goes, and, you put, or when somebody is taking a lie detector test and they tell a lie, the needle goes. Well, that's what these programs can show us. They tell us when it went. So it's easy to spot, and it's just like a tag you put on it. Look here, and so yeah, I agree with you. I am appalled by the U.S. bishops siding with Democrats. Yep. Who isn't, Gustavo? These guys have been in bed with the New World Order and the globalists like nobody's business. You could hardly find a faithful bishop today. You could count them on one hand. And it's just sad. It's really sad. But that's the condition. Okay. And we have to accept it. I mean, not accept it in the sense of not doing anything about it. I mean, God allows it to happen, and he has his reasons, and we have to live with it. That's what I mean, not accept. We have to live with it. Hopefully, it can get better. Zachary says, how do you explain the Israelite concept of slavery in the Pentateuch? Many attack the Bible because they see it as promoting chattel slavery. So how would you respond? Well, there are about a dozen different types of slavery in the Old Testament. It's not this monolithic idea of like we had in the United States, with you go get the slaves from Africa, you bring them over, you strip them of their rights, and you force them to work for you, and you pay them peanuts, and they're yours to buy, sell, whatever, and all that stuff. That's the worst form of human slavery. That's just total, I don't know, how would you describe it? Slaves without any rights whatsoever. What the master said, he determines the rights. In Israel, you had, like I said, a dozen different types of slavery. And you have to know the context of the slavery you're talking about before you start, giving merits or demerits to it. But slavery, even God allowed it, but he provided for the slaves. They had certain rights. The masters were told things they had to do for their slaves by God himself. Okay. They had certain land that they could be given, food provisions. Their children and their wives could not be sinned against. Okay. Like rape or things like that. As opposed to what Thomas Jefferson did. Okay. Raping one of his slaves. And so those things were taken care of. And you had to treat them well. You had to treat them so that they could function and be healthy and all the things that it would take. And the reason why it was allowed is because a lot of these people did not have any skills. They weren't farmers. They weren't. They didn't know how to farm, or whatever job they had. What do they call it? A blacksmith. They just weren't trained in this stuff. So you could have slaves, and they would do manual labor. That was what their occupation was. They do manual labor, and you get paid for your manual labor. And it just so happened in this kind of theocratic society that the slave could not be out on his own. Okay, he did not have enough wherewithal to have a home. He didn't have an education. He didn't have a trade. So he would be your laborer to work in the fields or whatever, and he would be paid. Okay, and it's another term that's usually used for this, indentured servitude. Okay, wherein you do have certain rights, you don't have full rights, because your master is the one who basically calls the shots for you, but he's going to take care of you. Okay, now we have an interesting story in the New Testament, in the book of Philemon, where we have a slave owner. His name is Onesimus. Philemon, and he has a slave, and his name is Onesimus. And this was the culture of the day. Nobody was considering it, wrong, because Philemon took care of Onesimus. He was his slave, but he treated him with certain rights, gave him food, gave him lodging, and in return, Onesimus gave him labor. Okay, and Philemon was a rich man, and so he probably had a lot of land, and that land needs to be taken care of, or else thorns and thistles will grow on it, and the animals will take it over, and so you had to have some good labor to keep those lands intact. And Onesimus runs away. He's probably a young man, wants to make his fortune in Rome. So he goes to Rome and thinks, he's going to have a new life and striking it out on his own. And there's a lot of opportunity in Rome at that time. Okay, it was the big burgeoning city. And at any rate, so he meets up with St. Paul, who's in prison, and just about to be let out, and he meets Philemon. Onesimus, and he converts him to the Christian faith. And Onesimus turns out to be such a good laborer, and very enthusiastic, that Paul wants to keep him for himself. And he says he has thoughts about that. And then he realizes that no, this is Philemon's servant, slave, and he sends Onesimus back to Philemon. Tychicus takes him back, and it's a long trip back to where Philemon is, near Ephesus. And he writes a long letter to Philemon. And he says, I met up with Onesimus. I converted him to the Christian faith. And I know you are a Christian, and you are highly respected in your area. And I implore you to take Onesimus back and treat him with kindness, and forgive his error from running away from you, and blah, 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 blah. And Paul is really, really pasting on the mustard here to make sure that Onesimus has a good arrival and is well accepted by Philemon and his wife and his son. So here you have an answer. So the answer is Philemon treats Onesimus well. Paul accepts it, has no qualms about Onesimus being the servant of Philemon at all. And he knows that Philemon has legal rights to Onesimus, and Paul recognizes that. And whereas Paul wanted to keep him for himself because he wanted to use him in the gospel ministry, he knew that there was a legal bond between Philemon and Onesimus, and Paul sends Onesimus back. And we assumed at the end of the letter that Philemon does take him back because he's an honest, respectable man of his city. And Paul says, I know you're going to do the right thing. And there you have it. So that's the assessment the New Testament gives on, is that there's nothing wrong with having someone in your employ who does labor for you, as long as they're treated with respect, given certain rights, all the things that one would expect. Okay. So, it's like anything else. It's not the thing that's bad in itself. It's the people that can make it bad. And people can make indentured servitude bad by mistreating. And as a matter of fact, in the Old Testament, they were told, if you mistreat your servant, God's going to mistreat you. Okay, because there was a tendency for that to happen. Of course, when you get to our century, and they don't even believe in God, when they go there to take these people from Africa for slaves, they don't think they have to pay the price to anything. All they're worried about is how much money they're going to make off of these slaves. That's wrong. That's at the bottom of it all, is the abuse of humankind for your own self, no matter what aspect it comes in. Okay? So, whether it's sexual slaves or labor slaves or even people that are mistreated by corporations today, yeah, there is a form of slavery if you want to talk about it, if you want to expand out the definition. Any kind of abuse of somebody who's under your employ is wrong. All right. Dr. Jonathan, nice to see you. Great stuff. Thank you. God bless you too. Okay. Are Orthodox sacraments valid? Yes, they are. Why the addition of the filioque? Oh, I think there is probably more political reasons for the filioque than there are theological. to be realistic about it. At this time, 1000 AD, Constantinople, the whole Eastern block of Christianity was a power unto itself. And in the early days of the church, when Christianity wasn't so prevalent in the East, and Rome basically was, that's the cradle of Christianity. There wasn't too much bucking of the bronco because they needed Rome, and Rome would cater to their every need, and whether it was practically or theologically. But by the time 1000 came, the Eastern bishops started feeling their oats, as they say, and began wondering just how strong the ties had to be with Rome, because logistically speaking, it just probably wasn't working out for them. Because if you had a conflict in your diocese in the East somewhere, say in Constantinople, and you had to write to Rome for a decision, like they used to do, you had to write to Rome. Well, by the time you got a reply from Rome, either the incident was over, or it had ballooned into a total revolt, or like a cancer just metastasizes and it became so bad. What would be the use of writing to Rome? Let's take care of this issue ourselves. and figure out what the story is. And after all, we're the church too, right? Did the Holy Spirit abandon us? Do we have to write to Rome for every single thing that we need, or every decision has to be made? So in that sense, it became a practical, not impossibility, but not practically feasible for the East to function properly. Decisions had to be made on their turf and in their, because the Pope doesn't even know what's going on there. He gets this theological problem. What's the context? Where did the guy come from who started the problem? And all these kinds of things they had to figure out if you really want to get down to the truth of something and make the right decision. So that just wasn't happening. And so I can see that if an issue comes up where, all right, does the Holy Spirit come from the Father and the Son, or just the Father? And, should we write to Rome about this? And, maybe they had some big discussion about it. And, the decision says, well, no, we're taking care of everything else ourselves. Now let's decide this simple issue. And we declare that, it does not come from Jesus. It comes from the Father only, the Holy Spirit. So, and then Rome got a hold of that decision, and push came to shove, and Rome made its decision. So you can't do that. And they got all the theologians on their side. And, once you put Rome to the test, instead of saying, okay, well, we made a mistake, the East said, hey, we're in authority, and we believe this so much. We've already decided it. Our theologians are just as good as yours. Okay. And, we can quote Eastern fathers, and you quote the Latin fathers, and it just was a political hurricane that just got out of hand. And so they split. Now, they almost got back together in the 14th century, just 300 years after they split. And so they were trying. Both sides knew that something was wrong. They needed to fix it. And something got in the way in the 1300s, and they never did complete the whole discussion they were having, and it just fell apart. So, and that was the last time that they talked about it. Okay. And as time went on, the East became more separated from the West. It's almost like the world got split in two because it's just too far away. It's just too far away. We didn't have the internet or phones or, airplanes, or you had boats, but there was a lot of land. There's a lot of land in between the water, and you couldn't get to the East. You had to go by horse. And that was just, even for those who were used to horseback, even for them, it was too much. So things fell apart. So I say that's why there's a lot of political and logistical issues involved in this whole thing. And the filioque just happened to get in the way. It just happened to be the tipping point, basically, of the separation of East and West. So then, of course, after that, it wasn't just the filioque. It's because if you don't accept that, you're not going to accept the papacy. You're not going to accept a lot of doctrines declared by the papacy. So, that's the short version. All right. Do you think pastors like Kenneth Copeland are sincere in their beliefs, or are they scam artists that know what they are doing? I think Kenneth Copeland might be mentally handicapped, but people keep giving him money. Kenneth Copeland has been around a long time. Kenneth Copeland and his wife, Barbara, I think her name is, he's been around since the 70s, mid 70s, even before that, early 70s. So I don't know how old he is now. He doesn't look that old, but that's a 50-year stint that he's been on. And he's just as popular now as he was before when he was younger. And I did see the clip of him laughing at the fact that the Democrats think they won the election. And that's typical Kenneth Copeland. I mean, he's part actor, part pastor. He's very flamboyant about his delivery. And so I'm not surprised that he went on laughing for 5 minutes over the fact that the Democrats think they won the election. Now these guys, you have to understand, Kenneth Copeland, Oral Roberts, he's no longer here, and his son, Richard Roberts, and Jimmy Swaggart, and there's a whole string of them. Yeah, these guys, they grew up in the Pentecostal Assemblies of God Protestant sect, okay? And those two, they're the fastest growing Protestant denominations in the United States. At least they were. I'm not sure if they still are. They probably are. You know, they talk a lot about miracles and tongue speaking and all that kind of stuff. So that's very attractive to people. And Assemblies of God and Pentecostal pastors will tell you that at least 50%, sometimes up to 80% of their congregations are ex-Catholics. Yeah. See, we produced the babies in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and had families of, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, sometimes bigger than that. And then the Protestants come along and suck them up when they grow up, you see. And that's been happening for decades. That's how a lot of these Protestants fill their churches. Yeah, ex-Catholics, because they were the ones practicing birth control, and we were the ones having the babies. Okay, so we made enough babies to give the Catholics 65 million in the 1970s alone, and it would have been more today. It would have been a lot more than 65 million. It's only like 70 million or so. Why is that? Well, because a lot of Catholics are practicing birth control, either artificial birth control, or in many cases, even in the conservatives, are practicing NFP. And they're limiting their families to 2.7 children on average. Okay, so we're not making as many babies as we had before. Okay, so there's a dearth in the Catholic population and also in the Protestant pews because there's not enough ex-Catholics. But at least back in the 70s and 80s, ex-Catholics were making, they were making Kenneth Copeland and Oral Roberts and Jimmy Swaggart all kinds of money. They were happy to be out of the Catholic Church. And in someone who says, praise the Lord, all that kind of stuff. So instead of Dominus Vobiscum, it's praise Jesus. So that's where they're getting all their money from. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys know what they're doing. They've been doing it for so long now, their conscience is totally seared. So now some of them did start out right, though, we had the revival movements in the 1800s, and you read a lot of those stories, and they just had a movement from God. It's just something was calling them, and they may have believed in their heart that they're doing the right thing. But I'm sure there's a large amount of them out there who know that the quickest way to make money is to start preaching about God, and you're going to be healed. And look at this guy down in Texas. What's his name? The guy who preaches on TV and he's always doing this with his eyes. What is his name? Osteen. Yeah, Osteen. And he brags about the mansion that he bought with all the money that he makes from these people. And boy, every single sermon that he preaches, it's all about this world. Every single one. And it's kind of captivating when you listen to it. It's just, but there is not a one word about you're a sinner in need of salvation and you're either going to heaven or hell. I mean, you just can't find it. Okay. So he's got a system down. He knows it works. His father did it before him. And this guy took over. What's his name? Osteen. What's his first name? And then his wife is into it. She's beautiful blonde, and she's out there preaching and raking in some more money. And their house is a mansion that is just exquisite down in Lakewood, Texas, I think it is. Yeah, so these guys have been at it for a long, long, long time. Back in the 80s, they had a big blow up because the guy was running the PTL club, Baker, Jim Baker, and his wife. What was her, Fannie Mae, or what was her name? Anyway, she used to wear all this makeup, make her eyes 3 times as big as they really were, with the big eyelashes and the flowing hair and the dresses, and oh my gosh. But they would just rake in the money. I mean, they knew how to say the right things at the right time, what people wanted to hear. And Jimmy Swaggart but the PTL club got caught in a wife swapping thing, and then Jimmy Swaggart got caught by his arch enemy in taking a prostitute to a motel room, and his career went down the drain. But boy, he could lavish it on. He could play the piano and sing, and he had the greatest voice, just greatest gospel voice. And he had all the right intonations and hit the right key at the right time, or the right note at the right time, and stress it, and just had a very vivacious, inviting personality. And he made millions and millions. And his house was a mansion too. The guy who wrote the late great Planet Earth back in the 80s, what's his name? Gosh, forget his name. Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey, yeah. The world was going to end in 1989, and Russia was going to come down and beat up Israel, fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. And Hal had it all mapped out. And of course, 1989 came and went. And Hal was living in luxury. He always used to wear these alligator shoes wherever he went, and lived in a mansion. And yeah, so I think what these guys were all working on was that the year 2000 was going to be some monumental thing. And so they're all writing books leading up to what was going to happen around 2000. The world was going to end, Christ was coming back, and the rapture was going to occur, and we were going to go through the tribulation, and then Jesus would come back and rule from Jerusalem, and we were all looking for that. There used to be, they had these bumper stickers they used to put on the back you could put on the back of your car, say, in case of rapture, this car will be unmanned. That was all going on, and boy, yeah, most of them are shysters, though. Yeah, they really are. You see, it's the first thing, if you're making money, a lot of money, when you're preaching the gospel, the first thing you should do with that is give it away. Now, granted, you put some away for your family, for your food, your house, blah, blah, blah. Anything over and above that, St. Paul directs us, give it away. Do not seek to have a lot of money. So when you see these preachers living in mansions and bragging about how much money they make because their gospel preaching is so good and all this, they're phony. Okay? Because they're not obeying the rules. So, yeah. So I hope that all answers your question. I didn't mean to go so long on that, but everybody should beware. All right, there you go. I forget the guy who asked the question about the vows. And I bet you this is where it comes, what Ryan is saying here. I bet if he said a rosary whenever he was tempted, he would feel exceedingly better when he made it 54 days. Yeah, that's probably true there, Ryan. All right, Zachary, question 2. The widely accepted view is that mountains are generally carved by glaciers. What is biblical traditional view about the formation of mountains and concerning the ice ages needed for that view? I don't know if ice ages are needed for that view. Oh, you mean the glaciers? Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. So the biblical view is that when God created the landmass that he talks about in Genesis 1, we concur that that is one landmass, and that's called Pangea. And as a matter of fact, it says in verses 9 and 10, it says, and he separated the waters from the land. So, and it says he made the waters go into one place, which means that there is one mass of land that came out of that. When you withdraw all the waters to one place, those are all the oceans that we have. And the result of that is that one landmass. Okay. So that's true up until the flood of Noah's day. Then you have the land masses breaking up, as it says in Genesis verse 8, verse 3 and 4, I think it is, right around there. It says the land masses broke up and the water came out from under the earth. Okay. So the land masses, if the land masses are breaking up, there's a great force that's making them break up. Part of that is the water that's coming up. Okay. And so you're now giving the land mass momentum. And momentum is going to keep those land masses moving because there was such a great force to break them apart, and it's going to keep them moving. And what do we have now? Well, we have the continental drift. Okay, so now Pangea, there's one landmass is broken up, and it's broken up into 7 continents all around the world. And on the edge of all those continents, what do we see? We see mountain building. Okay, look at from Alaska down to Washington, Oregon, California, Mexico, Baja, South America, all the way down to the tip of South America. What do you see? You see mountain ranges all the way up. Okay, and that's one of the land masses that would have been moving. So in other words, here's Pangea right here, and here's the western part of Pangea. So let's say, Arctic region up here, Alaska, Oregon, Washington, California, Mexico, South America, and it's all moving like this. And so what's it going to do? It's going to go right into the rock area, soil area. It's going to dig it all up, and it's going to come up this way, and it's going to make mountains the whole way as this land mass is moving, you see. And that's exactly what we see. When you look on the other side of the world, what do you see? Same thing. Here's Indonesia down here, all the what they call the red fire circle, and all the way up to the north and down to Africa, what do you see? You see mountains, okay? And you see little mountains in the various areas, and that's where they would be pushing up north, okay? And you see some in the south just a little bit, and that's because they're pushing down toward the southern end. So basically, the mountains are forming because we had this big breakup with the flood, and we had the continents now created out of Pangea, the one landmass, and as they move, they dig up all the rock and soil and build our mountains. Okay, so you don't need any glaciers. Glaciers would come after the flood. Okay, just the opposite of what they're telling us. Why? Well, because the climate changed. Now you had a lot more water to deal with. That's going to cool the earth down. Yeah, because it's the oceans that keep the temperature what it is. And if you have more oceans now, then they're going to keep that temperature down much further than having it fluctuate so much. Okay. And they're going to cool the earth down, which is, what water does. All right. So that's how we would explain it. Okay. Question 2, community. If I may add in this relation, were there mountains early on at the time of the garden and pre-flood? We don't know. We don't have any evidence of that. So I would have to say in the, the ratio or odds, I would say no, there weren't any mountains. Okay. Pierre Osaka. All right, we got a couple more minutes left. Hi, Dr. Sungenis. I'm converting from Protestantism to the Catholic faith, but I have been struggling with 2 issues from Vatican II. First is the statement concerning some people being saved without faith in Jesus. The other one is how Protestants and other schismatics and also part of the church and are also part of the church and saved. That feels like it flies in the face of everything the church taught before. Okay, let's go back over this. First is a statement of Vatican II concerning some people being saved without faith in Jesus. All right. What they're talking about there is not everyone in the world has heard about Jesus. Okay, that's just a fact. But they have a conscience, as Romans 1 and Romans 2 says. At that time, Paul was talking about the Gentiles that didn't have the Jewish law or even know the Jewish God. And he says, well, what do you do about them? Well, he is trying to show the Jews how bad they were, even though they had the law, they had God, they had Moses, they had everything, and they were still disobeying. And Paul wants to make them look bad so that they will repent. And he says, well, look at the Gentiles. These don't have the law that you have, yet they believe God exists. And God wrote his laws on their hearts. Okay. In Romans 1, he says they know from this that they are to honor and thank God. Okay, Romans 1, verse 20. And then in Romans 2, verses 14 and 15, he says, the conscience that they have tells them whether they're obeying the law God wrote on their heart or not. So they know when it's wrong to kill someone. They know it's wrong to steal from somebody. Why? Because God wrote the law on their heart. And yet they never heard of Moses, never heard of Yahweh, never heard of the 10 Commandments. Okay? But the laws of God are written on their heart. And then he says in verse 13, and get this, the doers of the law shall be justified. In other words, if these Gentiles obey the law written on their heart, they're going to be justified before God in place of you Jews who have the law, have Moses. God actually speaks directly to you, and you don't obey the law. You go out there and steal and commit adultery and all these kind of things. That's what he says in Romans 2:17 to 24. So these Gentiles are going to be standing in heaven while you Jews go to hell. because they obeyed the law that was written on their conscience, while you, having clear testimony from God himself, the commandments were written by the finger of God, you still disobeyed. And you had more evidence than the Gentiles ever did. Okay. So that's what it's talking about there. All right. So now you say how Protestants and other schismatics are also part of the church and saved. Well, the church never says anybody's saved. All right. Especially schismatics and Protestants, that they can be saved. Okay. Why is that? Well, because God's going to judge every man based on what he knows. And if you hadn't had the privilege of coming into the Catholic Church, where the true gospel is, God's going to judge you based on what you know, just like he judged these Gentiles in Romans chapter 2, based on what laws were written on their hearts by the finger of God. Okay? So much so that they could be justified. Wow. Okay? We really need to stress that. Whenever I brought this passage up to those who think, oh, only Catholics can be saved, they're just like, when you look at Romans 2, they're like, blah, 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 and they try to, just dance around it, or just pretend it's not there, or it really doesn't mean what it says it means, all this kind of stuff. No. Okay. God wants all men to be saved. That's what Romans 2 says. That's what 1 Timothy 2:4 says. God desires all men to be saved. All men, every man, everywhere. He's in the business of salvation. And all you have to do is repent, obey the law, and thank and honor God. And you're on your way. Okay? And then hopefully you'll hear about the Catholic Church and get the full graces of God and help you along your way in this very sinful world, because it's very hard without the church. Very hard. So, but it is possible. Okay. And God makes it possible for each man. And each man is going to be judged on what he knew. And us Catholics, we're going to have the hardest judgment, because we've been given everything. Interpretations of the Bible, interpretations from councils, catechisms, sacraments. I mean, there is so much that we have to take advantage of to keep us on the road to salvation. It's uncanny. Can you imagine trying to keep your salvation, keep on the straight and narrow without all those helps? That's tough. All right. So the more you know, the more God's going to use to judge against you. So, all right. It's 5 after 10, so I have to go. Sorry to say. So I am going to copy all your questions here and hopefully have some time to deal with them tomorrow. What was I going to do tomorrow also? Oh, I wanted somebody to send me the link to Vigano's reaction to the story from the Vatican about Cardinal McCarrick. So if someone would be so kind enough to send me that, I would appreciate it. So, bear with me here. I want to make sure I get your questions. Okay, I got them. All right, so we'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions today. All the rest of you, and there's a lot of you there. Why is it not showing? There it is. Okay. So don't forget to visit robertsongenis.org, where you can get books and DVDs and all kinds of good stuff. So visit there, and if you can, hit the donation button. That will help us keep the program on the air and help me to do all the things that I need to do to teach you the things that I need to teach you. All right, so tomorrow we'll see you then, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m.